Welcome to Bill and Tony's Excellent Adventure in Music. Here are your hosts, Bill Fraser and Tony Sartu.
Welcome to Bill and Tony's Excellent Adventure in Music. I'm Bill,
And I'm Tony.
and we're going to explore our love for music by sharing some facts and our thoughts on some of the best albums of all time.
Now, this is our second album review show in season three, and this is where we're discussing albums from the 80s and 90s. Today's episode will be our second featuring Van Halen, or if you prefer, our first featuring Van Hagar. Yeah, that's right. We're doing Van Halen's 5150. So when we started this podcast, we were focusing on albums on the Rolling Stone Top 500 list. 5150 is notably absent from this list, so I guess this is a wild card selection from your list of personal favorites.
It's a travesty. It's a travesty, I tell you. A miscarriage of justice.
Well, we'll have a chance to litigate that case as we do the show. So why don't you tell us your personal history with 5150?
So 5150 came out when I was 15 years old. You and I were 15 years old when this album came out, and this was right in my Van Halen years. I was about as big of a fan as you could possibly be. I had worn out my 1984 cassette to the point where I had to buy another one. And, was devastated when I found out Dave was leaving the band, as, any Van Halen fan was. And then the announcement, Sammy's going to be the lead singer, and this album comes out. And of course, I've got to get it. And I get the album, and it becomes just an anthem. Like, I thought 1984 was like the soundtrack. 5150 is the soundtrack to my teenage years, like legitimately. Like, and when I think about my teenage years, I'm hard pressed to not think of 5150 as an album.
I remember you telling us that in the 1984 pod as well. So for me, and I don't remember what I said, but for me, I had 1984. I did not was not a Van Halen fan growing up. This record actually is what made me a Van Halen fan. So, since I don't have that DLR history, this for me is the Van Halen version that I like. I know that's an unpopular opinion amongst the Van Halen acolytes, but that's just my truth.
So, just something interesting. I was watching a DLR interview on Joe Rogan, and he got asked by Rogan, what's the difference between the David Lee Roth Van Halen and the Sammy Van Halen? And he put it very, very succinctly. I ain't talking about love. And Sammy's talking about, why can't this be love? So it's all about, dark, larceny and running with the devil versus happy love. Everybody's good. Everybody's going to be okay. Put a little love in your heart. And I think he put it pretty well.
Damn, I didn't realize that he said that in an interview because I was going to make that observation. So I guess I'm glad you said that now so I don't sound like I'm just regurgitating Joe Rogan.
All right, Tone. So we would love to hear from our fans. And we've got our website is updated, www.billandtonypod.com. We would love to hear from you via email, bill at bntexcellent or tony at bntexcellent. Our Instagram is Bill and Tony Pod. Our Twitter is Bill and Tony Pod. And our Facebook is Bill and Tony Pod. I got to do something about the email. I'm not there yet. I'm working on it. BNT Excellent for now.
You put in a ton of work getting this stuff straightened out, so I really appreciate it. All right, so that takes us to the social and musical context. This came out, 1986? Tell us what was going on at the time.
1986 was a very interesting year. So a lot of contrasts going on in 1986. You've got these horrible tragedies with the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion and the Chernobyl nuclear incident. And you've got things like Hands Across America trying to do good for people. In sports, there were some amazing things, some really interesting things. 5'7" Spud Webb won the slam dunk contest. Mike Tyson, at 20 years old, became the youngest heavyweight champion ever in 1986. In 1986, Jack Nicklaus won his 18th and final major. And you've got early career Jordan breaking a playoff record and scoring 63 points in a playoff game. You've got Gretzky in the heart of his career breaking records and scoring again. And Tone, you know what else you had in 1986 that I didn't remember? You had 11 Major League Baseball players getting suspended for drugs. and it
Really?
was it was the the Keith Hernandez and
Hmm.
that whole group. I remember, but I don't think about it a lot.
Yeah, you know what? Because we didn't care.
No, agreed, agreed. Columbia Records dropped Johnny Cash in 1986.
Smart.
You've got the Iran Contra affair going on. You've got in New York City the Preppy murder. Jennifer Levin
Mm.
was murdered, and Robert Chambers was convicted of manslaughter at the end of the day. And you'd be hard as a sports fan to not remember Bill Buckner missing a ground ball and the Mets beating the Red Sox in the World Series in 1986. And you know what, Tony? You know what the other thing was in 1986? The Chicago Bears won the World Series, and they even did a little song about it that went on to chart in the top 100, the Super Bowl Shuffle.
Well, they won the Super Bowl, not the World Series, but I got you. The Super Bowl show. I forgot about that. Can you believe that that
The
was an
Super Bowl
actual
Shuffle,
thing?
exactly.
Oh
We
my
are the Bears
goodness.
shuffling crew.
But what was the the cringiest part of that? Was it Jim McMahon or was
It was
it
McMahon.
Ditka?
It was McMahon. It
It
was
was
McMahon.
McMahon.
It
Yeah,
was
it was
McMahon. Yeah.
pretty cringy. All right, so that brings us to movies. So the top grossing movies in 1986 were Top Gun, Crocodile Dundee. Talk about something that's lost to time,
Wow.
right? And that was a franchise. So there were multiple, big hits with that. And I
Hmm.
don't know if anyone has seen or talked about any of those movies in 30 years. Platoon, Karate Kid Part 2, and Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. Other notables were Aliens, the second Alien movie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Stand By Me, Blue Velvet, and The Fly. As far as TV goes, why don't you tell us what was going on there?
So you had must-see TV on NBC. You had Cosby Show and Family Ties and Cheers. You had Murder, She Wrote, Angela Lansbury, and The Golden Girls, and 60 Minutes, Night Court, Growing Pains, Moonlighting. It was a phenomenal show. And wrapping it up, Who's the Boss with Hold Me Closer, Tony Danza.
Well, I'll tell you that was you had your must see Thursday, but Tuesday on ABC was a pretty good day too, because that was where you had Who's the Boss, Growing Pains, and Moonlighting.
That was a
And
good night. Yeah.
I was a Moonlighting OG. Just loved that show
I
from
can hear
day
the
one.
title track playing in my head as you're talking. So
Al Jarreau. Okay, so now the year in music, the best-selling albums that were released in 1986 uh, were True Blue by Madonna, Slippery When Wet by Bon Jovi, Graceland by Paul Simon, Control by Janet Jackson, and the Top Gun soundtrack. I'm going to read a couple more because they were interesting. The sixth was License to Ill by the Beastie Boys, Master of Puppets by Metallica, and then number nine, Into the Light by Chris de Burgh. That was the ninth biggest selling album released in 1986, and that's another one, lost to time. And as far as the number one albums from that year, Whitney Houston had the longest running number one and the biggest selling album overall, but it was released in February of 1985. So Whitney Houston came out in February of 1985 and was a total slow burn and until really it got hot in 1986. So that was an important album by an important artist, but it just took a long time to build. And then 5150 was number one for 3 weeks and was one of the big albums released that year.
their first number one album.
There you go. Some other important albums from that year. You had the Miami Vice soundtrack, Jan Hammer, right? Was that the
Yeah.
guy?
The
The
instrumental. Yeah.
the Broadway album by Barbara Streisand. And then you had Welcome to the Real World by Mr. Mister, a number one album
Was
that
that the
when
one
we
with Take These Broken Wings and Kyrie on it?
exactly. And and that'll, I guess maybe I'll jump over to the top singles. Two of the top 10 singles from that year were Broken Wings and Kyrie by Mr. Mister.
Mr. Mister was awesome.
So the number one song that year was That's What Friends Are For. That was a benefit song, Dionne Warwick and Friends. Say You, Say Me from Lionel Richie. How Will I Know was number six from Whitney Houston. The Greatest Love of All, also by Whitney at number 11. You Give Love a Bad Name by Bon Jovi at number 30. And one that I
Wow,
had to call
wow,
out,
wow, wow.
I had to call out number 36, Mad About You by Belinda Carlisle. I think we've talked about Belinda before on the pod, but this video,
That was prime Go-Go's years and Belinda Carlisle years. Yes, exactly.
our friend James was obsessed
Quite
with
enamored.
specifically though the Mad About You video, and she just looks amazing. And so I always fondly I think of Mad About You whenever uh it comes up. I think of that video. And then you've got Manic Monday by the Bangles, written by,
Wasn't it Prince?
yeah, Prince wrote Manic Monday. That's the number 48. And then Why Can't This Be Love at number 69 by Van Halen, and Walk This Way by Run DMC and Aerosmith was 89. So that's it for the singles. You want to tell us about the album?
Sure. 5150 was Van Halen's seventh album, their seventh studio album. It was recorded in November of 85 to February of 86, about a 3 month recording time. I think Sammy is quoted as saying it really took them about 10 days for the album to like come to shape, but they recorded it over 3 months. It was recorded by Warner Records. It was the first of four albums from Sammy, and it was the first one after David Lee Roth.
And the lineup, as you mentioned, is Sammy on lead and backing vocals and guitar, Eddie, guitar, keyboards, backing vocals, Michael Anthony on bass guitar and backing vocals, and Alex Van Halen on drums. The album was produced by Mick Jones, Don Landy, and the band, and it has 9 tracks, running time of 43 minutes and 16 seconds. You happen to remember who Mick Jones is?
Foreigner. He was
Yeah,
the guitarist for Foreigner.
yeah.
So do you know why Ted Templeman didn't record this album?
No. Oh, wait, because he was working on David Lee Roth's album, right?
He called Eddie up a week before they were supposed to start recording the album and said, "Hey Ed, sorry, I've committed myself to Edom and Smile and Dave. You guys are on your own."
That was a choice. Wow. So do you think that is that a statement about who he preferred to work with, or was it a bet on who which he thought would be more successful?
It's interesting because you go back to the history of it, and Templeman was the guy who didn't like Dave. He was the guy who wanted Sammy to be the original lead singer of Van Halen. He tried to convince them to actually have Sammy as their lead singer, and they're like, no, 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 we want Dave. So he didn't like Dave. The fact that he then pivots to Dave is
Wow.
mind-boggling to me. Absolutely mind-boggling to me.
I did not know that. Thank you for that. All right. So that was like a bonus pre something you didn't know. Thanks, Bill. How about telling us about the album art? It's a pretty distinctive album
It,
cover.
it's a it's a distinctive album cover, but it's not my favorite Van Halen album cover. You've got the Atlas model holding up the globe with the VH on it, with the VH rings wrapping around. They distinctively changed the Van Halen symbol from the David Lee Roth era Van Halen symbol to the Sammy Van Halen symbol, where the V and the H, it wraps around in a circle,
Mhm.
whereas it didn't in the DLR years. And you've got this Atlas figure who's got a 5150 chain across his neck. He's like got a gold chain on, and he's holding up the weight of this Van Halen globe effectively. And the model was Rick Valenti, who was actually on Body Shaping on ESPN.
Oh, I
Um,
remember
a
body
lot of
shaping.
a lot of people thought it was Lou Ferrigno,
Hmm.
because Lou Ferrigno was huge at the time, like literally and figuratively, and and Rick Valenti actually looks like Lou Ferrigno. They have a very similar look about them. So it was really easy to look at the album cover quickly and say, "Wow, they got the Incredible Hulk to be holding up the Van Halen album," but it wasn't. So it's an interesting album cover. I mean, I think the fact that they're holding up the weight of this, and
Hmm.
maybe that's the story they're trying to tell. But
Yeah, no, I actually think it's a pretty good album cover. A couple of things I never looked at really that closely. I didn't realize that that's a 5150 chain that he had on. I actually never noticed that. And the other is I would never have thought of this, for the rest of my life, but I remember body shaping and Kiana in particular. That was the name of one of the hosts, and watching that in the morning was not a bad way to start the day.
So the other thing about the album itself, so on the vinyl of the album, etched into the vinyl of the album was "Play Me Loud."
Okay, cool. So, you already gave us a teaser on something you might not know, so I'll do one now. I'm gonna do 5150, and for all the Van Halen fans, you already know what 5150 is, but in case we've got listeners who don't, I'll explain what 5150 is. Bill, of course, you know what it is, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
5150 is a police call in Los Angeles. It's to allow the law enforcement to take custody and put someone who is behaving in an unhinged or some other psychotic way, put them in lockup for 3 days. The interesting thing is that it came about from something called the Lanterman-Petrus Short Act of 1967, which actually ended all hospital commitments by the judiciary system, except in cases of criminal sentencing or those who were gravely disabled. So the act itself ended the practice of putting people in jail indefinitely for psychiatric reasons. But they realized that sometimes you kind of need it. And that's when they created the California Welfare and Institution Code 5150, which allows people to be involuntarily placed in psychiatric hold for 72 hours. So that's 5150.
It's also the name of two things, right?
Oh yeah, I thought that you'd get to that later, but yeah, so if you want to talk about it now, go ahead.
So it's the name of Eddie's recording studio that was built that they actually recorded this album in, and it's the name of the album.
Yeah.
And that maybe kind of dovetails into something you might not know. I'm going to talk a little bit about Noel Monk. Tony, are you familiar with Noel Monk at all?
Never heard of this person.
All right. So Noel Monk was Van Halen's manager from 1978 to 1985, and we didn't talk about him too much when we talked about 1984 as an album, but he was their manager when they recorded 1984, and he specifically bridged the gap from Marshall Burrell, who basically got them signed and out of the gate and got them the Warner contract and got them, to kind of grow and be a big thing. And Noel was their tour manager, and he took over in 1978. And his first order of business was to figure out a way to get Van Halen out of the terrible contract that Marshall Burrell signed them to. So Marshall Burrell, the contract that he signed with Warner, basically allowed Warner to renew Van Halen at the same exact terms every 2 years ad infinitum. So they had basically no points, no nothing. They owned nothing. They would have made no money. They were in awful, awful shape. So what did Noel Monk do? Noel Monk decided, I'm going to bury Warner in paper. So he kept sending requests for royalties and accounting questions and tour questions and just absolutely inundated them with paper, like where they were buried, like an attorney would do with discovery, where they just try to bury somebody with discovery. And he buried them with all of this paperwork so much that Warner missed the filing date to renew the contract. So they missed their 2-year renewal, and Van Halen became a free agent.
Do you think was that always the intent? I mean, because it could have been just trying to be a nuisance, but do you think he was actually trying to distract them?
It was 100% his intent. It was his tactic to distract them away from catching that, and he buried them with paperwork, and he got them out of the contract.
Bully for him. That's a good job.
So Noel Monk made them multimillionaires by doing that. Not only did Noel Monk do that, Noel Monk also convinced the band to handle their own merchandising. So he was ahead of the curve with what a lot of the bands are doing now with merch. Mm-hmm. So he's like, guys, you do not want to be outsourcing that. You're going to get 10 cents on the dollar or less. We're going to get 50 cents on the dollar or more if we control it. And he had them making tons of money by controlling their own merchandise. The other thing that Noel did is he actually was kind of a little creative in how he found, I don't want to say sneaky, but a little creative in how he found things. So he went dumpster diving in Warner's office's garbage, and he got their black book of artist allocations, and he was able to actually navigate how much money Van Halen should make versus what other artists were making. And he wrote things into their contract, basically saying things like they always had to make more than whoever else was on the bill, or at least as much. So there were multiple tours that they did or concerts that they did where they got increased. And there was one instance specifically at a festival in the US where Bowie was getting paid $1.5 million and Van Halen was going to get paid a whole lot less. And he's like, no, our contract, you got to pay us. And he got them more money. So he was an absolute crazy advocate for making them more money. So you go through the years and Van Halen, the sex, drugs, rock and roll of it, and the rift between Eddie and Dave, and the little greed and jockeying for positions. Noel Monk is quoted as saying the worst thing he's ever seen in music that any artist has done is what Alex, Eddie, and Dave did to Michael Anthony.
Oh,
In the middle of the 1984 tour, they said, "You don't deserve any points. We're going to redo the contract because you know what? All you are is a bass player. We could bring anybody out there and do that." So in the middle of the 1984 tour, they basically wrote down all of the money that Michael Anthony was going to make.
I mean, I don't know how contracts work, but I mean, if they signed a deal and he's, an equal partner, how does that happen?
Well, because they could kick him out of the band going forward. So basically, they leveraged the fact that he wanted to be in the band with them,
I
and
see.
said so. He gave up prior royalties, and what wound up happening, when Sammy came in, is Sammy and the new manager wound up giving him some of their points so that he should try to make Michael Anthony whole again. That then ultimately led to saying we don't need to pay Noel Monk. We're paying him 20%. Let's get rid of this guy. So they wound up getting rid of him. And whether that's Noel Monk's perspective, whether that's actually what happened with why they got rid of Noel Monk, don't know. But he's got no reason to say the Michael Anthony piece other than kind of telling a story. But it kind of connects with a lot of the things that I read the Alex Van Halen book, I read the Sammy book. A lot of it connects.
Well, that answers the question that I asked you yesterday, which was I was trying to think about like why Michael Anthony, basically is attached to Sammy Hagar, considering that he's a founding member of Van Halen, and you've clearly answered that.
Yeah. So Sammy was, I'm going to say in quotes, better to Michael Anthony. Michael Anthony was always loyal to Alex and Eddie. They banned him from going and playing with Sammy once they kicked Sammy out of the band, and he didn't for years and whatnot. So there was a lot of history there, and a lot of everything I've read. It's just like as a lot of money, a lot of fame, and a lot of alcohol and drugs are in the mix. A lot of bad feelings,
Hmm.
and you could kind of feel the interviews when you've got the brand new Van Halen with Sammy in the band, and they're saying with Sammy we're a band, we're all equal. Dave treated everyone like they were lower than him, and then you cut 20 years forward and they're saying the same things about Sammy, and Alex doesn't even mention Sammy in his book. Not one mention of Sammy in his book. Not one.
Well, that's a lot of fun.
All right. So, Tone, why don't you tell us a little bit how they got to Sammy?
Yeah, so this is fun stuff. So Sammy wasn't their first choice to replace Dave, even though he was in the running initially, back in the day when they were looking for Dave. Sammy wasn't their first choice to replace Dave. And even though Sammy was in their same like ecosystem of California rock and roll, their first choice was, believe it or not, Patti Smythe from Scandal fame.
Bang, bang. I am the warrior.
Thank you, Bill.
Yes, I am the warrior.
So, do you know how Eddie got turned on to Patty?
Yeah, I don't remember the story, but I've heard it a few times. But please
So the way
remind
it
me.
goes is that Valerie Bertinelli, his wife, was a big fan of Scandal, and she was saying, "Eddie, I want to go see Scandal. I want to see Scandal." So Scandal comes to LA. They go to the show. They have a great time. Patty Smythe sees them there, and she calls up Eddie, and he does a song with the band, and they're just hanging out after the gig, and they're just having such a good time, and they just said, screw it. They hopped on the tour bus, and they were just, went from that first gig, spent the next week with Scandal on their tour bus, playing multiple gigs with them, or Eddie played multiple gigs with them. And then ultimately that led to Eddie offering Patty the job. Now, she didn't respond, and she, was, engaged to be married, ended up getting married, is now pregnant, and she still hasn't responded, and Eddie's still looking for a singer. And Valerie is booked to go do Letterman show in New York, and that's where Patty Smythe lives. And Eddie's with Valerie to support her on Letterman. Patty Smythe comes to the taping to hang out, and Eddie finally says, "Listen, I gotta know, are you in or out?" And she said, "I'm getting married. I've got a baby coming. I live in New York. I can't do it." And she says no. So she was the first choice and the first person to say no. A second choice was Steve Perry from Journey. So, we're in 1984, 85. Dave is leaving the band in 1984, and Steve Perry at the time is taking a break from Journey. And he says, "No, you know what? I want to do my own stuff." He's, having trouble with the band. He does his solo record, Street Talk, and this was actually pretty successful. It went double platinum and had four top 40 hits. So Steve is like, "Gosh, these guys are kind of annoying me. I'm kind of doing pretty good on my own. Maybe I'm not going to come back to the band." So, Eddie runs into him. They know each other from Southern California. And he says, "Hey, do you want to be our singer?" And he thought about it. Steve Perry thought about it. And ultimately, he decided that he wasn't going to join the band. Bonus Steve Perry nugget, though, for you. Did you know that he sang backing vocals on Sammy Hagar's solo stuff in 79 and 80?
I did not, but that's awesome.
That's pretty wild, right?
Yeah.
And then my last one is Daryl Hall. I mean, I can see Steve Perry, I can see Patty Smythe a little. Daryl Hall, I cannot see it. But on an episode of Live at Daryl's house, Daryl and the band, they usually do their shows from Daryl's house in upstate New York. They go down to Cabo to go to Sammy's place, and they do a Sammy show at Sammy's place in Cabo. They're having dinner, and Sammy says, "Daryl, one thing I've been dying to ask you all these years, have you ever heard the rumor that Eddie was going to offer you the job?" And Daryl said, "It's not a rumor. He offered it to me." And Daryl Hall legit was offered the job. He confirmed it to Sammy Hagar on camera, said, "Eddie offered me the job," and he turned it down.
And you know what he said? "I can't go for that. No, no can do."
You got me. That was good. All right, so that's
Yeah.
it.
Well, there was another one though too. They considered the lead singer Eric Martin from Mr. Big as well.
Hmm.
And so and they eventually got to Sammy. Do you know how they got to Sammy?
Yeah, tell us. I know, but go ahead.
Okay, so um, Eddie was a Lamborghini guy, and Sammy is and was a Ferrari guy. And Eddie's Lamborghini was in the shop, and Eddie took his Lamborghini to a mechanic that a lot of famous people use, this guy named Claudio. And Claudio just so happened to be Sammy's mechanic. And in the I Can't Drive 55 video, the mechanic that's in that video is Claudio. So Claudio is talking to Eddie, and he sees Eddie, and he's like, "Why? What's wrong? Why are you so down?" It's like, "Oh, Dave left the band. We're really, really pinched. What, blah, blah, blah." He's like, "I'm working on Sammy's Ferrari over here. You should call Sammy." And he said, "Sure, why not? Do you have his number?" He gave him his number. He called him in the shop from the mechanic's shop, called Sammy, and set a date to actually connect and chat. And Sammy was actually originally wanted to try to snipe Eddie, because he's like, "Hey, I'm looking for a hired gun guitarist. Maybe I could get Eddie to come play on an album with me." And they were eventually able to convince him.
Two things. The first is you mentioned Eddie's Lamborghini, and we talked about that on 1984 pod, right?
Yep,
Like,
yep,
didn't they actually record
they did.
his engine? Um, and the other is like I've heard that, so I'm familiar with that story, and Sammy has told the same story too. So Eddie and Sammy are telling the same story. The part that Sammy also added in that Daryl Hall interview was he told that story as well. But then he also said how when Dave left, he told his then wife at the time, he goes, "They're looking for someone. They're going to call me eventually." And he
Yeah,
just felt like,
yeah.
and that makes
And he said
sense.
it's either me or Steve Perry, or there was one other guy, and it's like it's one of the three of us. They're going to call me. Yeah,
Yeah. So what doesn't make sense there is he was considered for the job back in 79 or whatever. He's in their orbit. It took Claudio to make that connection. It doesn't quite ring true, but they both tell the same story. So I mean,
I have to think the story is true, and at least the bringing them together from a phone call perspective.
Yeah.
I have to also think that they were considering it, and Sammy knew that it was going to happen. And in his book, Sammy is very clear on the chronology of all of that as well. So, and he also says that he was 2 weeks away from recording his next solo album when they called him. Okay, so he had his album in the can. It was ready. It was written. It was all set to go. He had his band. He was ready to go. And he told his wife, I'm not doing it. Like maybe I can convince Ed to come and play in the studio with me, but I'll go humor them. I'll go listen. I'm not doing it. And he went and, they sat down, and he was in a suit, and they were all like grungy and, rock star grungy. And he was all like, dressed up and business. And, the first hour and a half of the meeting is like, they're talking nonsense. And he's like, whatever. And Ed finally says, hey, why don't we just jam a little bit? And they had been working on a few songs, and they had the makings of Good Enough and Summer Nights. And those two songs, basically Sammy wrote the lyrics on the spot for those two songs, and then they became a band.
There you go. Cool. All right. So wait, do we still have one more? Oh gosh, we have one more, something you might not know.
We have another, yes. So Sammy is an interesting guy. If you're interested in a short, interesting read, his book Red, his history in rock and roll is an interesting read. He talks about in that book, he deeply believes in extraterrestrials, and he believes in ghosts and a lot of things. And he has had very personal, powerful experiences with extraterrestrials and also with ghosts, where they've visited him. They've been his dead father showed up the night he died. So lots of things like that. So he talks about an experience that he had when he was in his early 20s, where he was sleeping, and I say in air quotes, sleeping, and he kind of wakes up out of his sleep, and he senses that there's this ship with two creatures 12 miles away, and they're tapped into his brain wirelessly through a connection. And he hears, oh, he's waking up, we've got to go. And then he says they fired off some type of numerical code, and in a split second, somebody pulled the cord, and then they were disconnected. And then in his book, he mentions that he was reading later on in life a book by an author called Ruth Montgomery. The book is called Among Us. And the book talks about walk-ins, aliens who would come and take over your body in your sleep. A person would not die, but would wake up and the next morning and not remember who they were. Gee, it sounds a lot like a song that's on that album, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my something you might not know. And I think people probably have heard, Sammy talked about that on Howard Stern, and he's talked about it in his book, and he's talked about it in a few different places. But the tie to the song is very powerful as well.
So he'd been visited by these aliens 3 or 4 other times, and he had done the research, and he found out that they were people called the Nine, and they were called the Nine because they were from the 9th dimension. And his publishing company is the Nine Music.
And he's very into numerology, and Nine and Red are like all over the place for him. The Red Rocker and Nine is everywhere in his life.
All right. So there we go. A bunch of some things you might not know. So that takes us to the, so we're going to do the track review next, but we wanted to talk about something else real quick.
I'd be loath to not mention the fact that, I stopped by your house the other day I was in the area and I stopped by, and you're like, hey, I'm watching Live Without a Net. And I'm like, I hadn't thought about that, and God knows how long. I didn't even remember it was a thing. And you prompted me to actually watch it also. And it was an awesome experience getting to actually remember what an 80s rock concert was like, and seeing young Van Halen with Sammy Hagar in the very beginning, is early on in their tour. It was in New Haven or New Halen, and it was an amazing concert.
It was really good. And I remember listening to that a lot too, in the 80s when we were in high school. But also something else that struck me about watching that concert was it reminded me of the show that we went to. I think we went to the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge tour, right?
OU 812.
Oh, it was OU 812.
We saw the OU 812 tour at MSG. Yep.
So we're at the OU 812 tour, which is the subsequent album. And I famously
fell asleep during Eddie's guitar solo, like literally snoring, drool, literally.
Dead asleep, middle of Eddie's solo.
I'm,
We were
I'm elbowing
sober. We
Tony.
weren't, there's no drugs, no alcohol. I was just bored. So watching Live
I'm
Without a
shaking
Net,
my head. I'm shaking my head.
Live Without a Net, Eddie does another, 8-minute solo. Alex does an 8-minute solo. I was saying, oh man, I think I started to nod off on my couch. I said, oh, this brings me back to the real concert.
The thing that Live Without a Net reminded me that I didn't really think about as much, and I thought about it a lot when I was listening to the album, is how much adding Sammy to the band beyond his vocals. Sammy's an amazing vocalist. Beyond his vocals, Sammy's a good guitarist. I
He
mean, he's
shreds.
not a he's not an Eddie guitarist. There are only a
Nobody
couple.
is. Yeah.
Sammy's a really good guitarist, like a shredding, like amazing
Yeah.
guitarist. I mean, if you have any doubt, listen to The Planets on Fire, Burn in Hell, Sammy Hagar. Listen to that song. It's amazing. And it's all him on vocals and guitar. It's insane. It's one of the songs that's kind of hat tip to AC/DC Thunderstruck. Like it might have inspired them a little bit. And Sammy absolutely shreds. And what you see in that concert video is them actually going toe to toe. And I'm like, I forgot how good Sammy was.
Yeah. Until watching that, I didn't remember that exactly what you were saying. And I was blown away. It was really impressive. And it definitely adds an important part to it because, Eddie clearly wanted to go in that direction, incorporating keyboards. And it's much easier to do that now when you have a high level guitarist in the band as well.
And when you want to do your solos, you have somebody who's great at playing rhythm. I mean,
Hmm.
Sammy's just an accomplished guitarist. So,
Yeah. Okay. So we're at the track review. So let's get to it.
all right, track one.
Hello, baby.
So that apparently is a nod to the Big Bopper, who I know who the Big Bopper is. He died with Richie Valens, but I don't know anything about him. So that was meaningless to me.
It's just a great way to open up the first track on your first album as the lead singer to Van Halen. He's introducing himself to the Van Halen fans, and he comes right out of the gun with that song is like right out of a cannon. It's hard guitar, driving drums right out of the start. It's one of the few tracks. I mean, there's a couple tracks on that album that you could hear. They could have been like, I could hear how they would have been changed a bit, but Dave could have possibly sang them. And for me, that's one of the tracks where I could see it wouldn't have sounded like Sammy's version of it, but I could see how they were working that up with having Dave in mind on it. And Sammy with the little bit of scat in the middle of the song with the, hey, waitress, a rack of what?
Hey, waitress! Look at her, man. You got any specials here tonight? Me and the fellas might be interested in. What's that? Rack of what? Well, I'll have some of that.
It's just a lot of fun. It's a great song.
So I was going to make the exact same observation, except come at it from a completely different perspective. I think it's not just like introducing Sammy. I think that he's doing David Lee Roth karaoke. I think he's trying to sound like
You think he's
David
trolling
Lee
him?
Roth. So so that's the question I was going to ask you is, so one, I think that he's absolutely trying to sound like him. He's doing that horrific scat piece,
I thought that was so much fun.
but it's fun if David Lee Roth is doing it. So do we agree that he's trying to sound like David Lee Roth?
I agree that he's showing that, hey, I can do that. I can be the dynamic guy who can have a little fun and do some stuff like that.
So then the question is, do you think they're trolling, or do you think they're trying to say to our fans, our mouth-breathing Van Halen fans, don't worry, guys, I'm just like him too? Or do you think that they're making fun of him?
Well, I think when we get to a track called "Best of Both Worlds," we're going to talk
all right.
a little bit about that.
Great.
But the
All right.
other thing that I would highlight on this track is the vocal harmonies are just insane. And I think that for me, this album highlights how much Michael Anthony brings to this band and how much he's underappreciated. What he brings, him and Eddie doing the harmonies with Sammy are just insane. It's just another level.
I'm going to push back and say on the underappreciated, I actually think that anybody who likes Van Halen greatly appreciates Michael
Van Halen,
Anthony's
I'm saying
harmonies.
Van Halen fans would appreciate him, but
Yeah.
people who are not big fans
Oh, they don't
wouldn't
know.
understand.
Yeah. We'll spend a little time here because it's the first one. So when I think about Van Halen, I think of 6 elements to a Van Halen song, and in descending order of importance. So I think of the main guitar riff. I think of then the solo, the lead vocals, Mike Anthony's high harmonies, Alex's drums, and then the lyrics. So the lyrics are the least important thing.
Lyrics are
Yeah.
last. Yes.
I put Alex's drums second to the bottom, even though he's a really good drummer. Here's why. And this song shows it, and it happens over and over again in this album. Yeah, he can play, animal, like on the Muppets drumming like crazy, but he's crashing cymbals nonstop. Half the time you can't hear anything else because all you're hearing is cymbals. And I'm just like, dude, how about let's hear the drums?
So I would say I think Alex is a phenomenal drummer. This track isn't necessarily a track that highlights him from that perspective quite as much. I probably agree with your ordering. For me, it doesn't detract from the fact that Alex is a phenomenal
Sure.
drummer.
Yeah. No, and I didn't mean to suggest he's not a good drummer, but that's just when I think about a good Van Halen song, that's what I think about. So with that in mind, you've got all the elements in there with, maybe some dumb lyrics, which aren't important. So it's a pretty good song.
It's a great rock and roll song.
So let me give you one last piece of trivia. Do you remember any other context for this song? It's in the movie Spaceballs.
I saw that. Yeah.
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 So there's a diner
But I don't
scene.
remember it. But
Yeah. So Dirk Benedict and John Candy walk into this diner. They're fueling up their spaceship. They're walking to get a bite to eat. And as the door closes behind them, jukebox kicks on, and it's
Hello, baby.
so Spaceballs. Next time you watch it, keep an eye
too
out for it.
funny. All right. That takes us to track 2. Why Can't This Be Love?
So it's the first single off the album, and to me, this is just a really good pop rock song. And I really like this song. Van Halen fans don't, because I think Van Halen fans have a problem with pop rock, and they want to think of the band as heavy metal. And hey, whatever, that's what you like. But this is pop rock, I think, really just at its finest. It's really well executed.
So I embrace all of the Van Halen, and it's one of my favorite Van Halen songs. It charted to number 3 in the US. It charted to number 8 in the UK. It starts with that choppy, boom, 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 synth, drummy, choppy beginning. And then you get that synth guitar mix coming in, and it's just a great pop rock song. It really is. And I think it is a pop rock song. And I think that's, the people who want the harder Van Halen will gravitate towards some of the other stuff on this album, because there is some hard stuff on this album.
Sure.
But this is a more of a pop rock song, and it's a phenomenal pop rock song.
I agree. All right, so next up is Get Up. This is a rocker.
This is a rocker. You get the driving guitar and the drum entry. And really, this one is one that highlights Alex with some drum gymnastics. It's kind of similar to the Hot for Teacher drums, this song for me, where you get a lot of,
I don't think it's similar to Hot for Teacher. I think it's Hot for Teacher. They could have looped in Hot for Teacher, and it would have been this. And you know what? I don't care, because that's freaking great. So no complaint, but it's not original.
It's freaking amazing. Yeah. The other thing that I like about it is the revving of the guitar. He revs the guitar, and it's an amazing high energy rock song.
And you get a lot of Michael Anthony on here too, right?
You do. And the harmonies, again, and the outro to the harmonies is phenomenal.
Yeah, just holding that last note.
The last note, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially coming off of Why Can't This Be Love, where there wasn't really any Michael Anthony harmonies. So it was nice to get a bunch of those on Get Up.
Yep.
All right, next up is number 4, Dreams, the second single off the album.
So this is the power ballad, and the synth opening with the love song feeling. And then it gets a little harder, and it balances that power ballad feeling. It's a great song, and the video sticks in my mind with the Blue Angels and whatnot when it came out. I love the synth in this song. I really do.
I think for people our age, I don't think you can think of this song without thinking of the video, because in 86, that video
It
was
was
awesome.
it was awesome, and it was everywhere. Yeah.
I mean, you're a 15-year-old kid. This song comes on. It's Van Halen, and that video, you're never turning that off.
I think I remember that they actually like helped recruiting. Like
Oh,
I
I'm
think
sure.
there was a recruiting bump after that video.
I'd imagine. So I think, the video's awesome. I just love this song. I think that Sammy's vocals here are things that David Lee Roth would only fantasize about being able to do. And Mick Jones said that, he pushed Sammy to like near tears, just going higher and higher. And and Sammy having to sing higher and higher, and he was able to get there. And oh no, it wasn't near tears, almost passing out.
Yeah, when he went towards the end of the song, when he goes all the way, like he goes really up there, and it's just. It's so good.
But he nails it. He doesn't
he does.
screech it. He is on those notes.
No, Sammy's got such a good voice. I mean, like he is such a powerhouse. It's amazing.
All right, so Dreams, great song. Fifth track is Summer Nights.
I can't think of this song and not think of the summer. It's such a summer anthem. You get the guitar riff opening. And you get another song that was kind of built with Dave in mind. So they started the guitar part when Dave was still kind of in the potential mix. And I could hear how it wouldn't have sounded like Sammy, but I could hear how this might have been a Dave song if it played out that way. But I'm really glad it didn't, because this is a freaking phenomenal song, and Sammy is so good in it.
I like this song because musically it's just really, really just pleasing. Like it's really nice. We talked about lyrics being the least important thing, and they are the least important thing, but there's some pretty, pretty crap lyrics here.
Just hang around every local parking lots. Oh, checking out all the gals, see what they got. Wow, they love it. When me and the boys wanna play some live with them human toys.
God, that's so gross, though.
Summer nights.
Sammy wasn't, 25 when he wrote those
37.
lyrics. He was 37. I mean, those lyrics are pretty creepy.
Hey, Summer Nights on my radio makes me happy every time it's on.
But then also coming right after Dreams. So Dreams has some really inspiring, beautiful lyrics. And then we go from Dreams into playing around with them human toys. Ew. All right. So that's the end of side one. So we go to side two. The first track, sixth overall, is Best of Both Worlds. This is the fourth and final single on the album.
I love the guitar open to this. It's a great rock anthem. And, this really is bringing Sammy in means that they can have the best of both worlds. A little bit of heaven right here on earth. One of my favorite songs on the album.
Yeah, I love this song too. That opening, it's really bluesy.
And,
really,
the dance, the best of both worlds dance.
Yeah. Somebody said this. Did they actually take that from ZZ Top? Because I think ZZ Top did that in like either
ZZ
Legs
Top
or Sharp Dressed Man
did similar. It was similar, but it wasn't exactly the same. And I don't know timing wise who was first. So I didn't do the research.
Eliminator was before this album, I think. I think Eliminator was like 84-ish, but I don't know. I guess I could have looked that up. Yeah, so I agree. I think that, I talked about those musical elements. All of it is here, including the lyrics. My favorite lyric here is that's really good stuff.
Yeah. Just a phenomenal song. Phenomenal song.
And the other note I have here though is like this is another one. Well, so I love this song, but listen back. Alex is just crashing those cymbals nonstop. It's just once I got it in my head, like it's all I can hear now. Whenever like as I'm listening to the album, I can't help but focus like, oh, there he goes again with the cymbals.
I can't say I hear the same thing. So
Yeah, well, now that it's in your head, listen back and tell me if you notice.
I think I'm gonna just be enjoying Alex's drumming. So I don't know.
Okay, so next is track 7, Love Walks In. This is the third single off the album.
So this is the Alien song. Contact is all that it takes to change your life, to lose your place in time. So it's a great song. I mean, I think the whole new love, Alien, Sammy, the new member of the band, embracing Sammy. I think, whether it's an alien comes walking in, new love comes walking in, Sammy comes walking in. I think that's what was kind of the feeling of this song. And it's just a great, great, great song.
I agree. I think that if you only read it for what's on the page, it's a great story just about new love. Forget about the alien stuff, which also works if you want to read it that way. Just as a story about what it's like to have new love, I think the lyrics are actually pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a coincidence, but it's track 7, 1984. The 7th track there was I'll Wait. Kind of similar flavor, heavy synth, and I'll Wait is as close to a love song, I guess, as Van Halen would come.
It's probably the only DLR era song that you could call a love-ish song.
So so Love Walks In, good song. Now we're on track 8, 5150, the title track. This song freaking rocks.
This song's amazing. So you get the cool, fast guitar opening and that metronome beat, and then gee, I wonder who that could be about.
I do like how it starts because you've got that riff. Eddie plays the riff through. First time, just Eddie. And then the second and third time, it's still the same riff, but it's with Alex coming in. And then comes the rest of the band. And it just, the way that it builds and then blows up is great.
Yeah, no, the way you just said it is exactly it. The way that it builds and then explodes is phenomenal. Yeah.
And good Sammy vocals, great Mike Anthony harmonies.
Yeah.
Tons of harmony on this one. And the lyrics are actually good. So, I mean, this is a winner.
Completely agree. And that takes us to track number 9, which is a little cringy. I'm about as big a Van Halen fan as you can get, and Inside is cringy. I don't fast forward it. I listen to it. Rap was big. You guys should do a rap song. Run DMC and
Walk This Way
and Aerosmith.
Same
it's
year.
Huge. So they introduced a rap-ish song, Inside, where you get this like breakdown scatty type thing, and it's just, oh man, it's cringy. Like I don't mind I don't mind that.
Oh yeah, no, yeah.
That's cool, but
They should have just saved that for something else.
Yeah. It's just odd.
Cringy doesn't even do it justice. It's so bad because it sounds like kids who are definitely not cool trying to sound cool.
You have a point there. No, you have 3 points there.
You guys are one of the biggest rock bands in the world. Why do you sound so geeky? It's unbelievable. I mean, we're nerds, and if we tried to sound nerdy, we couldn't sound that nerdy.
It was cringy. Yeah.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let's not talk about that one anymore. So where does it put us? Are we? Yeah. So that's it. That's it for the tracks, right?
We are through the tracks. Yeah.
Do you have your coin? We're going to do a
I
song
have
draft?
I have our regulation quarter.
All
Side
right.
heads, side tails.
Okay.
I will flip and you will call.
Okay. Heads.
It is tails.
So that means you get to pick. Do you want to go first and fourth or second and third?
I will go second and third.
Interesting. All right, then I will go dreams.
I will go best of both worlds, and I will go love comes walking in.
Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting that. Hmm. I think I'm gonna have to go, why can't this be love?
I will go 5150.
I'll go get up. You'll go summer nights, and I'll go good enough.
No, I'm going to go good enough.
Oh, you're gonna go good
I'm going to
enough.
go good enough. Yeah. I love summer nights, but I'm going to go good enough. Yeah.
Wow, after all that talk, how much you love summer nights.
I do. I love summer nights.
All right, well then I get summer nights.
All right. So at 1, Tony got dreams. At 2 and 3, I get best of both worlds and love comes in. At 4, Tony gets why can't this be love? Bill gets 5150 at number 5. Tony gets get up at number 6. Bill gets good enough at number 7. And Tony gets summer nights at number 8.
Final thoughts.
I really loved doing the research for this album. It brought me back to my teenage appreciation of a band that I love. I also learned a lot. And I think I said this to you last night. It's, sometimes you don't want to learn about your heroes because you get disappointed in them. And I try not to put any expectations on artists of who they are as people. Everybody's got their frailties and their issues and everything. I would have called myself an Eddie guy, right? I think, if you were a Van Halen fan,
Sure.
you're team Eddie, right? I don't know. I mean, all of the stuff that I read between even Alex's book and Sammy's book, Eddie was a flawed hero. He was a guitar hero, but he was flawed. And he and Alex had a tough childhood and challenges and all of that stuff. But all of this to say, I have a different appreciation for other members of the band now that I might not have had previously. I don't think I'm team anybody anymore. I'm team enjoy the music.
Sure.
And I think that's what I take out of this the most is enjoy the music, whether it's the DLR years or the Sammy years. For me, it's flip a coin. They're both great. I think you can look at the David Lee Roth albums and pick stuff that's just phenomenal. And I can look at this album and OU812 and go, oh my God, there's some amazing stuff on these albums. So I just really can't understand how this didn't get a little bit more love and consideration from Rolling Stone for what it was and what it is. So
I agree. I think this album is just so good. Listening to it so many times over the last couple of weeks, I just pretend Inside doesn't exist. And 1 to 8, these tracks are really, really good. It's excellent stuff. And I just think that it doesn't get the love because of all that Van Hagar hate that was there. Not necessarily in the culture because it sold a ton of records. The tour was enormously successful, so the general public loved it, but the industry didn't. The industry just had this vision of what this band was and didn't really accept it either. Like the hardcore fans and the industry just poo-pooed it, and to their detriment. This is good stuff.
Yeah, they're missing out. I mean, Sammy's awesome.
Yeah. And look, I don't know. I didn't read his book. Seems like, kind of a decent guy, for a rock star. He doesn't seem like a bad dude.
He seems like a decent guy.
So with all that said, I think we're done here. The last piece of business is, where does this album sit in your personal list of top 500 albums?
So for me, this is a top 100 album. It's probably, I think I had it at 88 the last time I ranked my albums. It's a phenomenal album. I think it deserves consideration for a top 500 album of all time, especially if you put it in the context of where it was, how it actually impacted music over the period of time, and how it transitioned genres. I think it's a great album.
If Captain Beefheart can be in the top 500, I don't know how this one is.
Hey, Captain Beefheart was 65 and 66 in the first 2 iterations of this. I'm putting this at number 88. Like, I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah. All right. So I guess that's it. We're done.
We are done. Tone, why don't you take us out?
All right, everyone. So thanks for listening. We hope that you enjoyed the show and that you come back and listen to more. We've got a lot more queued up for season 3, and we're super excited to have you join us on our next excellent adventure in music.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.
See ya.